My own father looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're old enough to figure it out yourself." I was 14, standing at the train station with my suitcase, watching him walk away with his new wife Linda and her 2 kids. They were heading to Disney World, their family bonding trip. What he didn't know was that my grandmother had been documenting everything. Every missed birthday, every broken promise, every dollar he refused to pay. By the time his plane landed in Orlando, his perfect new life was about to implode. This is how a scared 14-year-old became the architect of her father's financial destruction. I'm Rebecca Thompson, and if you saw my dad's Facebook page back then, you'd think we were the perfect blended family. David Thompson, successful insurance broker, devoted husband to Linda Martinez, loving stepfather to her kids, Mason and Sophia. The photos told such a beautiful story. Family barbecues, weekend trips, birthday celebrations. What those carefully curated posts didn't show was me, sitting alone in my room, wondering why I wasn't invited to my own father's life anymore. It started so gradually that I almost convinced myself it was normal. Dad had always worked long hours, but after he married Linda when I was 12, those hours seemed to stretch longer whenever I was supposed to visit. "Sorry, sweetheart," he'd say over the phone. "Big client meeting came up. We'll make it up next weekend." Next weekend would bring another excuse, another apology, another promise that felt increasingly hollow. The house I'd grown up visiting every other weekend suddenly felt foreign. Linda had redecorated everything, replacing Mom's memory with her own aesthetic. My old bedroom became Sophia's craft room. When I asked where I was supposed to sleep, Linda smiled that tight smile she reserved just for me and said, "Well, you're only here 2 days a month. The pull-out couch should be fine." Dad nodded along like this made perfect sense, like his daughter sleeping on a couch in what used to be her second home was just a minor inconvenience. The shift was subtle at first. Family dinners where I sat at the edge of conversations about Mason's soccer tournaments and Sophia's dance recitals. Movie nights where they'd choose films I wasn't interested in, then act surprised when I went to bed early. Beach trips planned for the weekends I wasn't scheduled to visit, though somehow my schedule never seemed to align with the fun activities anymore. I remember the exact moment I realized I was becoming invisible. It was Linda's birthday dinner at that fancy steakhouse downtown. Dad had made reservations for 5, then looked genuinely confused when I showed up. "Oh, Rebecca's here this weekend," he said to the hostess, like my presence was some unexpected complication. They squeezed a 6th chair at the table, literally pushing me to the corner while Linda opened presents I hadn't known I was supposed to buy. The gaslighting started around then. When I'd mention feeling left out, Dad would get that defensive tone. "You're imagining things, sweetheart. We include you in everything." When I pointed out that everything seemed to happen when I wasn't there, he'd sigh and talk about how complicated blended families were, how I needed to be more understanding. "Linda's trying so hard to make this work," he'd say. "It would help if you tried a little harder, too." But I was trying. I tried to laugh at Mason's jokes that weren't funny. I tried to show interest in Sophia's endless stories about middle school drama. I tried to pretend it didn't hurt when Linda would post photos of Family Fun Day on the weekends I was with Mom, captioning them with heart emojis and hashtags about blessed family life. I tried so hard to be the easy kid, the one who didn't cause problems, the one who just went along with whatever made everyone else comfortable. The money conversation started getting weird too. Dad had always been reliable with child support, but suddenly there were delays, excuses, promises of next week for sure. When Mom called to ask about it, I could hear him through the phone, talking about unexpected expenses and Linda's kids needing this or that. "Rebecca's old enough to understand," became his favorite phrase. Old enough to understand why her school trip money went to Mason's new baseball equipment. Old enough to understand why her back-to-school shopping got postponed because Sophia needed a laptop for her gifted program. The breaking point should have been my 13th birthday. I'd been looking forward to it for months, had already planned the day with Dad. We were going to go to that pottery painting place I loved, then lunch at the diner where he'd taken me since I was little. Then maybe a movie. It was going to be our day, just the two of us, like old times. Instead, I got a text that morning. "Rain check on today, sweetheart. Emergency came up. We'll make it extra special next time. promise. The emergency, I found out later from Linda's Instagram stories, was a last-minute family trip to Six Flags. Photos of Dad laughing on roller coasters with Mason and Sophia, Linda beaming in the background. The caption read, "Spontaneous family fun is the best kind. Sometimes you just have to seize the day." When I confronted him about it later, Dad looked genuinely confused by my tears. "It wasn't planned, Rebecca. These things just happen. You know how much you mean to me." But I was starting to wonder if I did know. If I meant so much, why did I feel like an afterthought in his life? Why did spontaneous fun never include me? Why was I always the one who had to understand, had to be flexible, had to make sacrifices for the greater good of his new family unit? The psychological warfare was so subtle I almost didn't recognize it. Linda would make comments about how mature I was for my age, how independent, how I didn't need as much attention as her younger kids. It sounded like a compliment until I realized it was justification for giving me less. Dad would praise me for being low maintenance, for not causing drama like some divorced kids did. I learned to swallow my hurt, to smile and nod, to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. The isolation felt complete by the time I turned 14. My weekends at Dad's house became exercises in loneliness. I'd sit in the living room while they planned activities I wasn't included in, discussed inside jokes I wasn't part of, made memories I'd only see later on social media. I became a ghost in my father's house, present but not really there, acknowledged but not truly seen. School became my escape, friends became my real family, and Mom's house became my only true home. But even there, I carried the weight of rejection. Why wasn't I enough for my own father? What was wrong with me that his love felt so conditional, so easily transferred to children who weren't even his blood? I started therapy around then, though I didn't tell Dad. Just another thing he didn't need to know about, another problem he didn't need to handle. The signs of complete abandonment started escalating that winter. Dad would forget to pick me up from school, leaving me waiting for hours before Mom could get there. He'd double book his weekends, acting surprised when I showed up for my scheduled time. The child support payments became increasingly sporadic, always with elaborate excuses about cash flow and unexpected expenses. When Mom suggested they revisit the custody arrangement, Dad's lawyer suddenly became very interested in painting me as a troubled teen who was better off primarily with my mother. Looking back, I can see the systematic nature of it all. The way I was slowly edited out of family photos, excluded from holiday traditions, forgotten in vacation plans. It wasn't neglect born of distraction. It was calculated distancing. Linda was building her perfect family unit, and I was the reminder of Dad's previous life, the complication that didn't fit the narrative she wanted to create. But I was still a child, still desperate for my father's love, still believing that if I just tried harder, caused fewer problems, needed less attention, maybe I could earn my way back into his heart. I had no idea that my grandmother Margaret was watching everything, documenting the pattern of abandonment with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen this playbook before. I didn't know she was building a case, collecting evidence, preparing for war. All I knew was that I felt like I was disappearing, one forgotten weekend at a time. The morning that changed everything started like any other disappointment. It was supposed to be our weekend, my scheduled time with Dad that had become increasingly theoretical over the past year. I'd packed my bag the night before, even though a growing part of me expected the call that had become routine. "Something came up, sweetheart. Next weekend for sure." But this time was different. This time, the call came with an edge of excitement in Dad's voice that I hadn't heard in months. "Change of plans, Rebecca. We're taking a family trip to Disney World. Isn't that exciting?" For a moment, my heart leaped. A family trip. Maybe this was it. Maybe I was being included again. Maybe things were going back to normal. "When do we leave?" I asked, already mentally packing my suitcase with summer clothes. The silence on the other end lasted just a beat too long. "Well, sweetheart, the thing is, this trip is really for Linda and her kids. You understand, right? They've been through such a hard time with the divorce and everything. Linda thought it would be good bonding time for our new family unit." "Our new family unit?" The words hit like ice water. "What about me?" I whispered. "You're so mature for your age, Rebecca. You'll be fine. Besides, your grandmother loves having you stay with her. Think of it as a special weekend with Grandma Margaret." That's when the real plan became clear. They weren't just excluding me from the trip. They needed somewhere to dump me so I wouldn't interfere with their perfect family vacation. And Dad had decided, without asking me or even informing me until the last minute, that I'd be staying with my grandmother. "I can't just drop her off like a package, David," I heard Mom say in the background. She must have been on speakerphone. "This is supposed to be your weekend with Rebecca." "It's one weekend, Sarah. Don't make this into something it's not. Rebecca will understand. She always does." I always understood. I always adjusted. I always accommodated. The family motto seemed to be, "Rebecca will understand," and I was so tired of understanding. But what choice did I have? The train station meetup was supposed to be simple. Dad would pick me up from Mom's house, drive me to Grandma Margaret's across town, then head to the airport. Instead, he suggested meeting at the central train station. More convenient for everyone, he said. Mom thought it was weird, but she had to work and couldn't drive me herself. I should have known something was wrong when Dad showed up with Linda and her kids. Mason and Sophia were practically vibrating with excitement about Disney World, chattering about rides and characters in the resort pools. Linda was checking her phone constantly, coordinating shuttles and restaurant reservations. They looked like a family heading to vacation. I looked like a problem to be solved. "Where's Grandma Margaret?" I asked when Dad handed me my suitcase. "She's running a little late, but she'll be here soon. We need to get going, though. Our flight leaves in 2 hours." He glanced at his watch with the kind of impatience I'd become accustomed to. Everything about me had become an inconvenience to be managed. "Maybe I should wait inside the station," I suggested, looking at the cold November sky. "You'll be fine out here, sweetheart. Grandma Margaret knows where to find you." Dad was already backing toward their loaded SUV, Linda and the kids already buckled in. "You have your phone, right? Call Grandma if you need anything." That's when he said it, the words that would replay in my head for years to come. "You're old enough to figure it out yourself." 14 years old, standing alone at a train station with a suitcase, watching my father drive away to Disney World with his replacement family. The finality of that moment was breathtaking. This wasn't about scheduling conflicts or miscommunication. This was abandonment, pure and simple. I called Grandma Margaret immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Grandma, Dad just left me at the train station. He said you were supposed to pick me up, but I don't think you knew about this." The silence on the other end was different from Dad's earlier pause. This was the silence of someone processing information, someone whose worst suspicions were being confirmed. "What did you say, honey? He left you where?" "The central train station downtown. He said you were running late, but I don't think—" "I'm coming to get you right now. Don't move. Don't talk to strangers. And Rebecca?" Her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "This is not okay. None of this is okay." Sitting on that cold metal bench, watching families rush past with their luggage and vacation excitement, I finally understood what I'd been too young to recognize before. I wasn't part of Dad's family anymore. I wasn't even a priority. I was a loose end he needed to tie up before he could enjoy his real life. The 2 hours I waited for Grandma Margaret were the longest of my life. Every minute felt like confirmation that I was exactly as disposable as I'd started to suspect. Other kids had parents who would never leave them alone at a train station. Other kids had fathers who included them in family trips instead of finding elaborate ways to exclude them. When Grandma Margaret finally arrived, she wasn't alone. There was a woman with her, professional-looking, carrying a briefcase, wearing the kind of serious expression that meant business. "Rebecca, honey, this is Mrs. Anderson. She's a family lawyer and she's going to help us make sure this never happens again." I didn't understand what that meant yet. I didn't know that Grandma Margaret had been building a file for months, documenting every missed visitation, every late support payment, every broken promise. I didn't know that abandoning a minor child at a train station was actually illegal, regardless of whether someone else was supposed to pick them up. All I knew was that for the first time in 2 years, someone was treating what happened to me like it mattered. Someone was angry on my behalf. Someone was taking action instead of telling me to understand and be flexible and accommodate everyone else's needs. The drive to Grandma Margaret's house was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that comes before a storm, not the empty quiet I'd gotten used to. Mrs. Anderson was making notes, asking gentle questions about other times I'd been left places or excluded from activities. Grandma Margaret's hands were tight on the steering wheel, and I could see her jaw working like she was having an entire conversation in her head. "Grandma, am I in trouble?" "Oh, honey, no, you're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. You haven't done anything wrong in any of this." She caught my eyes in the rearview mirror. "But some other people are about to be in very serious trouble." That weekend, while Dad was posting pictures of the Magic Kingdom with his family, Grandma Margaret was on the phone with lawyers, social workers, and anyone else who would listen to what had happened. She showed me a thick folder she'd been keeping, printouts of Dad's social media posts showing family activities I wasn't included in, copies of emails where he'd tried to reduce his custody time, documentation of every missed pickup and late support payment. "I've been watching Rebecca. I've been keeping track, and I've been waiting for him to go too far." Leaving me at a train station, apparently, was too far. By Sunday night, when Dad's plane was supposed to land, his lawyer had already received papers: child abandonment charges, violation of custody agreements, a request for emergency modification of visitation rights, and something I didn't understand yet but would soon appreciate: a freeze on his bank accounts pending investigation of unpaid child support. I spent Sunday night at Grandma Margaret's, doing homework and trying to process what was happening. Every few hours, Dad would call my phone, going from confused to angry to panicked as he realized what was waiting for him at home. "Rebecca, sweetheart, there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Can you put your grandmother on the phone?" But Grandma Margaret had taken my phone. "David can talk to my lawyer," she said firmly. "He's done talking to you." For the first time in 2 years, I felt protected instead of sacrificed. For the first time since Dad remarried, someone was fighting for me instead of asking me to be smaller, quieter, more convenient. The scared 14-year-old who'd sat alone at that train station was about to discover that she wasn't as powerless as everyone had made her believe. The war for my childhood was just beginning, and for once, I wasn't fighting it alone. The week after the train station incident changed everything I thought I knew about power, family, and justice. Grandma Margaret didn't just comfort me, she educated me. That thick folder she'd been keeping wasn't just documentation. It was evidence of systematic child abandonment spanning 2 years. "Sit down, honey," she said Monday morning over breakfast. "It's time you understood what's really been happening to you." She spread out printed emails, bank statements, social media screenshots, and calendar entries across her dining room table. It looked like a detective's case board, and in a way, that's exactly what it was. "This email," she pointed to a printout dated 6 months earlier, "is your father asking his lawyer how to reduce his custody time without affecting his child support obligations. And this one is him complaining about having to pay for your school supplies while Linda's kids need so much for their activities." My stomach twisted as I read Dad's words in black and white. The casual way he discussed reducing time with me, like I was a subscription service he wanted to downgrade. The resentment in his tone when talking about basic necessities I needed. "But how did you get these?" Grandma Margaret's smile was grim. "Linda isn't as smart as she thinks she is." She forwarded some of these to her sister, complaining about her difficult stepdaughter. Her sister happens to be married to Tom Wilson, my neighbor for 15 years. Some things have a way of finding their way to people who care about you. She showed me a spreadsheet she'd created tracking every missed visitation, every late support payment, every broken promise. The pattern was undeniable. Dad wasn't just being inconsistent. He was systematically phasing me out of his life while maintaining legal custody to avoid looking like the bad guy. The train station incident was just the evidence we needed, Mrs. Anderson explained when she joined us that afternoon. "Child abandonment is a serious charge, But the pattern of neglect and emotional abandonment we can prove makes this a clear case of parental unfitness. I was learning words I'd never needed before: abandonment, neglect, parental alienation, custodial interference. Each term felt like a key unlocking a door I didn't know existed. For 2 years, I'd blamed myself, thought I wasn't trying hard enough, wasn't lovable enough. Now I was discovering that what happened to me had names, legal definitions, and consequences. "What does this mean for me?" I asked. "It means," Grandma Margaret said firmly, "that your father is about to learn that children aren't disposable, and it means you're never going to sit on another cold bench wondering if you matter." The legal machinery moved faster than I expected. By Wednesday, Dad's bank accounts were frozen pending a full audit of his child support compliance. Mrs. Anderson had filed for emergency modification of custody, citing child abandonment and systematic neglect. The family court had ordered an immediate investigation by Child Protective Services. Dad's panicked phone calls went from confused to angry to desperate over the course of 3 days. I listened to the voicemails he left on my phone. Grandma Margaret thought I should hear them, to understand how people react when their actions finally have consequences. "Rebecca, sweetheart, this is all a misunderstanding. Grandma Margaret is filling your head with lies. You know Daddy loves you, right? We can work this out without lawyers." Then, "Rebecca, this is ridiculous. Your grandmother is being vindictive. She's trying to turn you against me. Don't let her do this to our family." Finally, "Rebecca, please call me back. The lawyers are saying terrible things that aren't true. I need you to tell them that everything's fine, that we have a good relationship. Please, sweetheart. Daddy needs your help." Each message revealed more desperation, more manipulation. The father who'd told me I was old enough to figure it out was now portraying me as a helpless child being manipulated by my grandmother. The man who'd abandoned me at a train station was now begging me to save him from the consequences of his actions. "Do you hear it?" Grandma Margaret asked after the last voicemail. "He's not apologizing for what he did. He's not promising to do better. He's asking you to lie for him, to protect him from the results of his choices." I did hear it. For the first time, I could see the pattern clearly. Dad's love had always been conditional on my compliance, my willingness to accommodate his convenience, my ability to not cause problems. Even now, facing serious legal consequences, he was asking me to sacrifice my truth for his comfort. The CPS investigation was thorough and eye-opening. The social worker, Ms. Rodriguez, interviewed me extensively about my experiences with Dad. She asked detailed questions about where I slept during visits, what activities I was included in, how often plans were canceled, whether I felt safe and wanted. "Has your father ever provided you with your own room during visits?" she asked. "Not since Linda redecorated. I sleep on the pull-out couch." "And how often would you say scheduled visits actually happened as planned?" I thought about it carefully. Maybe 30% of the time. There was usually some reason why plans had to change. Ms. Rodriguez took careful notes. She also interviewed Dad and Linda, and according to Mrs. Anderson, their stories were inconsistent and defensive. Linda actually made things worse by suggesting that I was a difficult teenager who doesn't want to be part of our family unit. The court-ordered psychological evaluation was the most enlightening part. Dr. Sarah Chin, a family therapist who specialized in divorce and custody issues, spent 3 hours with me talking about my relationship with Dad. "Tell me about the last time you felt truly wanted during a visit with your father," she said. I sat quietly for a long time, trying to remember. I think maybe before he married Linda, but even then, he was always distracted, always had work calls or other things he needed to handle. How did that make you feel? Like I was interrupting his real life, like I was a responsibility he had to manage rather than someone he actually wanted to spend time with. Dr. Chin nodded thoughtfully. "And how do you feel about the possibility of reduced or supervised visitation with your father?" The answer surprised me with its clarity. Relieved. I'm tired of pretending that relationships that hurt me are good for me just because they're family. Her report, according to Mrs. Anderson, was damning. Dr. Chen concluded that I had been subjected to systematic emotional neglect and abandonment, that my father had prioritized his new family to my detriment, and that unsupervised visitation was not in my best interest. While I was discovering my voice and my rights, Dad's perfect new life was imploding exactly as Grandma Margaret had predicted. With his bank accounts frozen, he couldn't make the mortgage payment on the house he'd bought to accommodate Linda's lifestyle. The credit cards Linda used for her endless shopping trips were maxed out and suspended. More importantly, the stress was destroying his relationship with Linda. According to neighborhood gossip that somehow always found its way to Grandma Margaret, Linda was furious about the legal mess. She'd signed up to be the wife of a successful insurance broker, not someone embroiled in child abandonment investigations. "She's telling anyone who'll listen that you're a vindictive little girl trying to destroy her family," Grandma Margaret reported with obvious satisfaction. "What she doesn't understand is that this has nothing to do with revenge. This is about accountability." The breaking point came when Linda's ex-husband filed for emergency custody of Mason and Sophia. Apparently, news of the CPS investigation had reached him, and he was arguing that Linda's household was unstable and potentially harmful to children. Linda, who had weaponized family court proceedings to limit her ex's access to his own kids, was now facing the same scrutiny she'd once applied to others. Dad's desperate attempt to regain control came in the form of a family meeting he demanded through Mrs. Anderson. He wanted to clear the air and work things out without courts and lawyers. Grandma Margaret and Mrs. Anderson agreed, but only under specific conditions. The meeting would take place in the lawyer's office, would be recorded, and I could leave at any time. Seeing Dad in that sterile conference room was surreal. He looked smaller somehow, older, like the legal pressure had physically diminished him. Linda wasn't with him. According to Mrs. Anderson, she'd refused to attend anything that might create more legal liability for her. "Rebecca, sweetheart," he started, using the patronizing tone I'd become so familiar with. "This has all gotten so out of hand. You know Daddy loves you, right? We just need to tell these people that we're fine, that this is all a misunderstanding." Mrs. Anderson interrupted. "Mr. Thompson, this meeting is for Rebecca to have the opportunity to speak with you if she chooses. It's not for you to coach her testimony." Dad's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the irritation underneath. "I'm trying to protect my relationship with my daughter. This vindictive legal action is destroying our family." "Which family?" I asked quietly. He looked startled, like he hadn't expected me to actually speak. "What do you mean?" "I mean, which family are you protecting? Because for the last 2 years, I've felt like I'm not part of your family. You left me at a train station, Dad. You told me I was old enough to figure it out myself while you went to Disney World with your real family." "That's not—" "It wasn't like that. Things are complicated with blended families. You're old enough to understand." "Stop saying I'm old enough to understand." The words came out louder than I intended, surprising everyone, including myself. "I'm 14 years old. I shouldn't have to understand why my father doesn't want me around. I shouldn't have to figure out how to matter in my own dad's life." For the first time in the entire ordeal, Dad looked genuinely stricken. "Rebecca, I do want you around. I've just been trying to balance everyone's needs. By making me disappear?" I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. "By putting me on a couch while Linda's kids get bedrooms? By canceling my time whenever Linda's family wants something? By leaving me alone at a train station?" "I made mistakes," he said finally, and for a moment I thought maybe we were getting somewhere. "But we can fix this. We can start over." "How?" The question hung in the air. Dad opened his mouth several times, but no words came out. He had no plan, no specific changes to offer, no acknowledgement of what would need to be different. He just wanted the legal consequences to go away, so he could go back to managing me as a minor inconvenience in his otherwise perfect life. "I thought so," I said quietly. "Mrs. Anderson, I'd like to leave now." The legal resolution came faster than expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence of child abandonment and systematic neglect, Dad's lawyer advised him to accept a plea agreement rather than fight charges in criminal court. He pled guilty to child abandonment and agreed to a modified custody arrangement. Supervised visitation only, twice a month, with a family counselor present. More importantly, for his immediate situation, he agreed to pay 3 years of back child support in a lump sum, money that had been legally owed but strategically delayed. The lump sum payment, combined with legal fees and court costs, essentially wiped out the savings he'd accumulated during his marriage to Linda. The house went into foreclosure. Linda filed for divorce before the ink was dry on Dad's plea agreement, taking Mason and Sophia back to her ex-husband's custody. Dad's perfect blended family dissolved in less than 6 months, leaving him alone in a one-bedroom apartment with supervised visitation rights to the daughter he'd tried so hard to erase. But the most profound change wasn't in Dad's circumstances. It was in mine. For the first time since he'd remarried, I had legal recognition that what happened to me mattered. I had documentation that I wasn't imagining things, wasn't being too sensitive, wasn't failing to understand complex adult situations. I had proof that I deserved better. Living primarily with Mom and spending every other weekend with Grandma Margaret, I started to understand what healthy family relationships actually looked like. People who wanted to spend time with me didn't need elaborate legal arrangements to make it happen. People who loved me didn't ask me to make myself smaller so they could be more comfortable. The supervised visits with Dad were awkward and stilted, but they served their purpose. With a counselor present, Dad couldn't gaslight me about our history. He couldn't rewrite events to make himself look better. He had to sit with the reality of what he'd done and how it had affected me. Slowly, very slowly, he began to acknowledge the truth. Not because he'd suddenly become a better person, but because he had no choice. The legal system had forced accountability that his conscience never would have. "I prioritized my marriage over my relationship with you," he admitted during one session. "I thought you'd always be there, so I took you for granted while I tried to build something new with Linda." It wasn't a complete transformation. Dad still made excuses, still minimized his actions, still seemed to think the real problem was getting caught rather than the harm he'd caused. But it was acknowledgement, which was more than I'd ever gotten before. The most important realization came during a therapy session with Dr. Chin, months after the legal dust had settled. "How do you feel about your father now?" she asked. "Sad," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "Not angry anymore. Just sad. Sad that he chose his image of a perfect family over his actual daughter. Sad that he'll never understand what he lost when he decided I wasn't worth fighting for." "And how do you feel about yourself?" "Stronger. Like, I know my worth isn't determined by whether other people appreciate it. Like, I don't have to earn love by making myself convenient." That was the real victory. Not Dad's financial ruin or legal consequences, but my own transformation from a girl who believed she had to earn her place in the world to a young woman who knew she deserved respect and care simply by existing. 6 months after sitting alone on that train station bench, I was living with people who chose to prioritize me, learning that healthy relationships don't require you to disappear to make space for someone else's happiness. I was building a life based on authentic connection rather than desperate accommodation. Dad never apologized for leaving me at that train station, but he didn't need to anymore. I'd already figured out how to save myself, and that lesson was worth more than any apology he could offer. The scared 14-year-old who believed she wasn't worth her father's time had become someone who knew better, and that knowledge would carry me through every relationship for the rest of my life, ensuring I'd never again mistake indifference for love or abandonment for complicated family dynamics. Some people spend their whole lives learning that they matter. I learned it at 14, sitting on a cold bench, waiting for rescue that came in the form of a grandmother who refused to let me disappear. That might have been the most valuable education I ever received.